Even after I left the business world and I went into full-time ministry, I really had no idea how churches actually started. I had heard stories about how people had gotten angry, hurt, and upset, and they would leave an existing church and go start a new church. That's what I thought happened. And I started in my ministry serving at two wonderful churches, but then I accepted an invitation to serve as a youth pastor at a church in Cobb County called North Star Church. Everything there was different. Everything was done with intention. They started that church with the specific intention to reach people that were far from God. I began to learn what it looked like to do all types of ministry with that intention in mind. Programming, children's ministry, worship, preaching, how we dressed, the style of music, everything. Intentional purpose was to reach people that were far from God. And because God has not forgotten about the unreached, they are close to His heart. He cares about them. He's their creator. He wants to call them to Himself through a relationship with Jesus Christ. And so at one point, I ended up moving over to Walton County to serve at Summit Church just up the road with my brother Butch. And he had told me, hey, we will help you plant a church if that's what God's calling you to do. And so they were so generous to allow us to have financial resources, but also to have people, a seed group that would become a launch team that would spend time together, praying together, preparing together to make Church at the Grove become a reality. While I was serving at seminary, I had been telling one of my professors about God's call on my life to plant a church. And we were at dinner one night after we'd been in class at a seminar all day, and he leaned across the table, looked at me eyeball to eyeball, and he finally said, when are you going to stop talking about planting this church and step out on faith and actually plant it? And so I began to put it in motion after that challenge. And we saw Summit Church just up the road. We also had North Star Church that was over in Cobb County. They became our two primary supporting partner churches. And with the help of Craig Story, we began to gather a team of people that felt called to join us, and we began to prepare them for launching a church that would reach these people that were far from God. We began to read the book of Acts with fresh eyes and deconstructing what the old mindset of church was, and then reconstructing this new idea of church based upon what Scripture said. And so we knew that from wherever we lived, whether it was in the middle of Walton County or down in Walnut Grove, within a rock's throw, there were people that weren't involved in church. There were people that were probably either not interested in God or church, or maybe some people that were spiritually curious, but they were hesitant to walk into an established church. God created those people to be in relationship with Him, and we knew that God wanted to use us as a church, a new expression to potentially reach those people. We eventually set September 10th, 2006 as our official launch date, and that's what we were moving for. But before we launched, we wanted to have these pre-launch gatherings. They were really practice gatherings where we would set up, have church, mainly for our launch team and maybe some family members, and it would give us a chance to have some practice runs. And it was one of those Sundays that we were doing a practice run that a couple was driving by Youth Middle School, and they saw the sign out front for Church at the Grove. They were headed to church that morning for the first time in years, and the intended destination that they were planning to arrive to, they were running late and running behind, and so they turned around and they pulled in and said, hey, we'll go to this church here, this meeting at the school. And so they were among our first guests, and later they came to Christ. They were among the first that came to Christ, and then later they were among the first to be baptized. And it was then that we knew that God was at work and He was going to do something special through Church at the Grove.
Hi, I'm Cindy Boyd. I've been at Church at the Grove since the very beginning, the very first Sunday. Actually, I was part of the Sunday night crew that met with Russ at Summit Baptist Church for a while. And when he gathered us all together and said, hey, I'm going to start this new church, I would love for you to come along, that was a no-brainer, because that group on Saturday night was like a community group. And so in my mind and my family's mind, it was like we were just moving our community group from one place to another, that hopefully it would gather more people and have more opportunity for other people to join us in that community group. All right, over the last 15 years, God has really moved in Church at the Grove. What started out as a small little cluster of people has grown to 2 campuses. And we've been blessed with 2 magnificent pastors to lead us. They don't use fancy words. They use everyday terms and everyday objects to help us really learn and bring things at home. My family has kept many things over the years that Russ has given us. Here's this that was in my kitchen window sill for probably 10 years now, wouldn't you say? When he preached a sermon on bullies. Lauren still talks about the time he preached the sermon about baptism, and he used the example of Krispy Kreme donuts and gave us all a Krispy Kreme donuts. It's things that help us really learn and remember. We remember his baptism sermon every time we pass the Krispy Kreme donuts. Every time I see a rock, whether it has bullies written on it or not, I think about Russ and the things that he has taught us through the everyday objects that we can see in everyday life. That's what helps people grow, because they understand what he's talking about, and it's not over their heads. It's an everyday object, like a rock, to teach a lesson and help you remember.
I'm Craig Ellington, and this is my wife, Lori Ellington.
Well, we were members of Summit Baptist Church for approximately 10 years. We started back when we were in the trailer at Summit Baptist Church, and we were there while we built the building. A lot of great relationships were made during that time. We loved Butch and Terry. We loved everything about Summit. And then a Saturday night service was going to be started at Summit, and our Sunday school class was asked if we would join that Saturday night service and get them plugged in there to help that grow. And from there, Church at the Grove was spoken about, and we decided, we prayed, and a lot of discussion went into it, but we decided to join Russ and Craig's story in the new church plant.
We did pray about it, and we had a lot of family discussions because it was going to be not just a change for us, but our whole family. Our youngest son was coming up into the youth group, and there was a lot of unknowns about, because it was such an established youth group, he was be leaving, and but we just prayed about it, and we had a peace that God gave us that this is the direction that he wanted our family to go in. So we just decided as a family that we would do this.
The sweetest part that for us, or for me, has been the relationships that we've made while we've been here. At the very beginning, we did set up and break down, and met at the middle school and the high school. Just seeing every Sunday, we did greeting and new faces coming in, and just awesome experience. How we've worked in the community. There have been hundreds of people that have come through the Church at the Grove, and we've just enjoyed meeting all the people.
And we've talked about this how many times over the years that we've mentioned people that we met at the front door greeting, and a lot of those people went on to be leaders in the church, elders, leaders of different committees, and it's just amazing the growth that we witnessed, and it was evident from the very beginning when we were meeting in the elementary school, probably from the first week, that God was going to do something special with this church, and you could just feel it, and you could see it in people. But the people that came through those doors for the first time, like I said, they got plugged in and went on to do great things, and then to even plant another church in Social Circle. Some of the folks that walked in the front door the first time, they moved on and planted another church. So it's just, we've always felt like that was where we were called, and God showed us, and he still shows us to this day, how much this church means to the community and to us and to so many people. Some of the long-term dream or goals that I see, or dream for us, and we've talked about it also, is just to continue impact in the community. Some of the young children that are in the church now growing up and being leaders in the church, maybe more church plants down the road. This community is growing. It's the location is phenomenal. I just think it's going to have an impact in not only Walton County, but Newton County, Rockdale County, the whole area for years to come. And that's what we look forward to. And when we do get old, we'll still be here and just celebrating what's been accomplished here and continuing to support God's work through this church.
We wanted to be a church that would serve our community with no strings attached, and that when we went out into the community, that people would see us, but really see beyond us and see the unconditional love of Jesus. Jill and I wanted to be missionaries in our own neighborhood. We wanted our church to be a community where everybody was a missionary in the circles that they ran and that they lived in. And so we would often talk about our neighborhood being a village. It was a village with about 100 huts in it, and we were the chief missionaries, and we wanted all the families in our church to see themselves in the same way that they were the chief missionaries in the village or the neighborhood in which they lived, reaching out to people that were far from God. And so our launch team and leadership team wanted to be intentional about being multiplying at the very beginning that we planted the church. We wanted to be a church that invested in new church plants from the very beginning. And so we even put in our budget to support a church plant before we ever took up our first offering. And that church plant is now a thriving church called River Hills Church in Winder, Georgia. And we partner with that church right now in planting churches and in doing ministry in Haiti and the Dominican Republic. In 2010, we had a great opportunity to move down to Walnut Grove and be right in the center of our community that God had led us to be in the first place when Walnut Grove High School opened and the principal agreed that we could begin gathering and having our Sunday morning gatherings in January of 2010. This was a great move for our church. It gave us an additional vision and strategy for reaching people far from God into the community. Our leadership from the very beginning had the community in and around Social Circle heavy on our heart. We felt like God would eventually lead us to plant a church there. But what happened is we began to have a vision to plant a campus there where we would be one church with two locations. And so we began the process of planning, and Nathan and Caitlin Boyd ended up leaving Loganville and moving right into the center of Social Circle. And in early 2012, we began having our first gatherings at the Social Circle Middle School gym. We moved later into a permanent space and then finally landed in the current space where we just love it, which is behind the Blue Willow Inn restaurant. And so we're excited about what God is going to continue to do in both of our communities and helping us reach people in Walton County and the surrounding counties.
So my name is Billy Guy. My wife is named Melinda, and I am usually known as the person with all the children. So we've been going to church at the Grove for some time now, and we, most of the time, went to the Walnut Grove campus, and we moved to Social Circle about 2 years ago and now attend that campus. So what led me to church at the Grove was, ultimately, I think a desire to seek something greater than myself, and Russ happened to be there at the right time in my life. But what I noticed when I came was how authentic the people were and how engaging they were, and I felt like they genuinely cared about me. I wasn't a believer. This is the church where I got saved at, and it'll always be special to me because of that. And I really have enjoyed the relationships that I've made and still have throughout these years. So what has meant the most along this journey of mine is how I have come to the understanding of what marriage is, and that it's a covenant, not a contract. And no matter how marriage is reciprocated to me from my actions, I still have obligations to my wife. And after God, it's my wife and then everything else. And it's a struggle. It's an evolution of righteousness, as they say. And it's something I have to work on every day. but it's definitely changed my outlook on life. What I look forward to in the future is, number one, is seeing how my kids grow up in church. And my daughter Layla loves to come to youth group and loves to come to church every Sunday. And of course, I'm tickled about that, and I really enjoy watching that. And I'm so proud of her. And the future of Church of the Grove, what I most look forward to is the continued impact that it has in the community, which is something that I've always thought was very special about our church. And I don't know that it's unique, but I definitely feel like that Church of the Grove goes above and beyond to be involved in the community. And now that I'm in Social Circle, I really look forward to watching that in action in our town.
What led us to be a part of the Grove and Social Circle, I think it was a time through searching our hearts, along with searching a few other churches, but then praying about it and kind of going after God's, kind of giving Him our ear and being willing to go wherever, whenever. And we discovered Church of the Grove and Social Circle, and I think what led us to go, help me,
I think it was a little different for each of us.
I think, yeah.
I think the connections through people that we made while we were there helped us to stay the relationships that we formed, but also how much our kids loved going and the relationships that they formed as going to Church at the Grove as well. Growing up not in church was a little scary as a kid, and so to see my kids love it and want to go and ask to go made a big difference for us on where we were going to church.
So what's meant the most to us in the past 5.5 years being part of Church of the Grove? I'm going to say that the connections.
The relationships that we've made that helped carry us through a lot that we've been through in the past several years. But the connections and relationships that no matter what we're going through, they always tend to lead us back to Christ and what He wants on our lives, and making sure that we're praying with each other separately, as well as our children and what they were going through. Honestly, if we weren't coming to Church at the Grove, I'm not sure when Landon would have, our oldest, when he would have accepted Christ, but to know the relationships and the people who helped guide us to get him there is really cool. And then to see our youngest already asking questions, I do believe is a result of our church family and what they mean to not only us, but our children.
In our community group, that's where we want to put some of that shout out to, and the connection with them, and being able to build that trust with somebody that we knew was going to love us no matter what we look like or on the inside, and of our faults and shortcomings. So I think connections.
Yeah, relationships.
Being able to dream or our vision of what we might see in Church at the Grove and where we could be as a whole. I think that having prayer through together and having some common vision, some common goal, and where we could be, wow, man, that could really get deep really quick. I'm thinking of huge playgrounds, but also lots of people, and being able to reach it out a few more locations somewhere, somehow, through God's timing, of course.
I would love to say mega church, but I don't really like that.
Yeah.
Because I like the smallness and the uniqueness that Church at the Grove has. And being able to do those relationships with people is not as easy when you see hundreds of faces on a Sunday. But I love the idea of the growth, where Kids Grove is going, where Church at the Grove in general is going. I'm excited to see that in the future of our kids and their lives, and just in general of where Church at the Grove is headed.
And mega church, but mega love, right?
Mega love.
So
Who knows? Maybe there's going to be another one overseas sometime too.
So in 2009, we partnered with Pat and Joy Harden and their daughter Kelsey, and we sent them to Oradea, Romania to be missionaries. And that would lead to planting a church in 2012 in Oradea, Romania called Fellowship of the Grove. And so did we plant a new campus in Social Circle and a new campus in Oradea, Romania at about the same time? Yes, we did. Why not do it all together? But not only that, a short time after that, we were able to send Austin Prince and the Shababy family and a few other families to Decatur to plant the church called The Gathering at Decatur Heights, as we continue to focus on planting churches and reaching people that are far from God. But God continued to still work in Walton County. I love these stories of two families, to me, that represent some of the typical families in our community. One was a friend of mine, and I'm just going to call him a Bubba. He's a Walton County native, and he was just fun to hang out with. And I'll tell you, he was not interested in Jesus. He wasn't interested in church, but we developed a friendship. And when his life and his family began to unravel, he came to me to ask questions that led to me sharing the gospel and him eventually turning to Jesus. Another family that lived in our neighborhood at the time, they were the family that were transplants from suburban Gwinnett County, and so they had moved out to Walton County and were beginning to start their new family already with a couple of children. And we had them over for dinner, and I asked the husband at one time, how would you describe your spiritual journey or your spiritual beliefs? And he said, well, I would consider myself a transcendental Unitarian. Which sounded strange to me, but it was indicative of how different people believe different things and how far people are from God. The wife simply asked this: are you going to be another judgmental church that simply preaches on about 4 or 5 soapboxes and it's all about do's and don'ts? That's the question she asked. And so we continue to engage with them. I actually read Mere Christianity of C.S. Lewis with the husband over that summer, and he ended up watching a Billy Graham sermon and sending me a text message as his profession of faith that he was putting his faith in Jesus Christ. Later on, we baptized his wife, and she had professed Jesus Christ. All of this was indicative of the fact that God had his hand on what was happening in and through Church at the Grove, and we knew that he wasn't finished yet. In 2013 and 2014, we began the process of purchasing the 20 acres that our Walnut Grove campus resides on right now. Not long after that, we began the process of planning and putting a building on this property that has been such a blessing as a result of so many generous people providing the financial resources. And this building is not just used for Sunday morning gatherings, it's used for so much more, just like our building in Social Circle is. God has been so good to us, and God is not finished with us. And I say this all the time, and I mean it from the bottom of my heart, is that the best is yet to come. We've been in a period of intense prayer and planning and strategy development, looking at what God is going to lead us toward in the next 3 to 5 years, this strategy and what he has for us, the vision for the next 3 to 5 years. And I can't give you all the details right now. I don't want to spoil the surprise, but let me tell you, it's going to include a simple discipleship path where it will take people who are maybe not even interested in God, or they're spiritually curious, and help them take very defined, simple steps towards spiritual maturity, not just to become disciples, but to become disciple makers. It will also include the development of a leadership pipeline where people like you who have been given spiritual gifts and spiritual talents, and you have passions for ministry, you will be able to take specific steps along that leadership pipeline, and God can give you a vision for your personal ministry that will help Church at the Grove take the next steps over the next 3 to 5 years. I believe all of this is about this, is simply recapturing this raw energy, Holy Spirit driven passion that God gave us over 15 years ago to plant a church that would reach people far from God. And I believe that the best is yet to come, because God is not finished with us yet.
Hi, this is Brandon and I'm Leslie. We're the Hardys. Our daughters are Carly, Lila, and Nora, and we've been attending Church at the Grove for about 6 years now. What brought us to Church at the Grove is kind of a funny story that I'm going to let Brandon tell.
Well, we were at a friend's birthday party and we were approached by a guy named Shane Smith. I know some of us remember him fondly. Great guy. So we got to talking, and he was telling me about how their current youth pastor was leaving to plant a church in Decatur, and he wanted to know if I was interested in interviewing for the position. So one thing led to another. I ended up applying and interviewing, but during this process, we just really fell in love with the church, what they represented, their involvement in the community. I'm really glad that they didn't hire me, because the guy they hired, Pat Harden, is phenomenal, and I could not touch the job that he did. But it was because of the church's involvement and just the way they live out the gospel in our community. That's really what drew us to Church at the Grove, and what made us want to be a part of this church.
Yeah, and God has worked in our lives so much over the last 6 years. We've since we started the church, we also had started a fostering journey, and the church was always really supportive and accepting of any children that we brought to the church that were placed in our home. And they've been supporting us in prayer and all of our endeavors involving that aspect of our life. And we've been in a few community groups throughout the last few years, and just the community and the friendships and family that we have developed, I guess, over the years has just really meant a lot. And our girls, they're eager to help in any kind of way with the church. And Carly, our oldest, has started volunteering with Kids Grove a lot with us, and they're involved with the youth ministry. We lead teams with the small groups with the youth ministry, and serve in Kids Grove. And I actually helped as a Kids Grove assistant for a few years. So we just jumped in and started going, didn't we?
Mm-hmm. What really excites us about Church at the Grove and the future in our community is just how since we've been here, we've seen the children that were in the youth ministry when we came on board just grow spiritually and take the reins and fill leadership positions within the church. Reese Baker, Jonah Faulkner,
Abigail Butcher.
Yeah, and it's really exciting watching them grow spiritually, because they're becoming the leaders in our community. They're the ones that are just mobilizing and taking the gospel out into the community, and they're also they're nurturing our girls' spiritual development, which is just really awesome, and it shows the power of discipleship and how what Church at the Grove did for us when we came on board. We're seeing that continuously lived out through these youth that are growing up into awesome leaders in our community.
Definitely watching seeing the future generation, the next generation that we have invested so many hours into as well, not to mention our own children and family, that just to see all of that come into fruition. I always have trouble with that word. And just like you said, the growth in the kids that are growing up and taking these positions, and watching Church at the Grove grow in that aspect, watching discipleship play out and come to life before our eyes is just amazing.
You see, I believe that God has given us an amazing team and an amazing group of leaders. It's amazing how quick we were able to pivot and begin an online ministry during this COVID pandemic era. And I believe even during the difficulty that we've seen during this season, that we still have developed some momentum. And I'm excited about the momentum and where it's going to carry us in the future. And as we just simply surrender to the Holy Spirit, surrender to God's direction, I believe that we will begin to see God do some things that can only be explained by the power of the Holy Spirit. See, I see us taking new ground. I see us taking new ground spiritually where people who've just been attenders move into leadership, and they begin to see how God can use their gifts and their talents to sacrificially provide for these new initiatives that we'll see rolled out over the next 3 to 5 years. See, I see potentially needs for additional gatherings because people are going to continue to come, and we're going to need space for children. We're going to add gatherings and add opportunities for people to worship, options for people to gather at different times. I see a season where we'll have to prepare potentially for new facilities because God is doing so many great things and so many new people are being reached that are far from God. Are you ready to see what God has in store for us over the next 3 to 5 years? I hope you're ready, and I can't wait to share this new vision initiative with you in person coming soon. My biggest prayer is this, is that our memories, we're celebrating 15 years, but my biggest prayer is that our memories will never exceed our dreams. And as we keep saying it, and I mean it, that the best is yet to come for Church at the Grove.